pick up where we left off. We'll do a little bit of conclusion here. Think about the questions or issues that you would like to discuss further after we finish this segment, and then we'll do some kind of closing takeaways. So, the glory of the coach is that of being the discoverer, the developer, the trainer, the power of others. This is exactly what we mean when we use the biblical terminology about the equipping ministry. So I think one of the most fulfilling things about pastoral ministry is when you see other people come alive to their potential, right? Come alive in Christ, come alive in their ministries, they discover what they have to offer, and that's really a wonderful thing to be able to see that happen. So one of the things that Moses is asked to do here is now share the leadership. And so I'm going to say, what does sharing the leadership look like? If you're going to be coming alongside the people of God that you are sharing with, how do you deport yourself? How do you present yourself to those that you are trying to empower in ministry? And one of the, here's a number of elements here that I want to highlight. First of all, be a real person. What do I mean by that? Be a humble individual that does not have to present a perfect face to the people of God, but be honest about who you are and what you're about. I mentioned earlier that one of my surprises in these retirement years is being involved in prison ministry. And I was surprised that I would be able to relate to the men that were locked up for lots of different kind of offenses: murder, rape, child molestation, etc. And they tell me that I relate to them very well. And I say, what are you seeing? What are you seeing in me that allows you to relate to me? And they simply say, because you come in here humbly, you don't judge us, you're just trying to know us and relate to us, you're just on our level, and you're not trying to be anything elevated. Well, I think that's part of what we need to be authentic, real people. Sometimes it means even telling your stories of where you are struggling. If you work those into messages that you give, places of application in your life, like my issue of debilitating fear and being honest about that. Anybody that's in a discipleship group with me knows that story. Some stuff that's more current than that as well. So being a real person. Accept your limitations. Share your limitations. Tell your limitations. Each of us has strengths. We know what those are. I always say that my strengths are very narrow, very limited in what I have to offer. I can write. I can speak reasonably well. I can teach. After that, I'm in trouble. I need your help. I'm not going to be the greatest counselor. I'm not going to be the greatest hospital visitor. I'm a passable administrator because I can organize ideas. But when we ask people for help, that says, fill in those areas where I am weak, people want to be invited in based upon the needs that they perceive that they can fill. So I need you in such and such a way. So we're all limited. Trust people as full partners in ministry. I'm having breakfast Monday morning with one of the men that prayed with me to release these fears in my life, because he has a ministry of inner healing prayer. He was also a big partner with me in the whole issue of seeing the people of God being equipped for their ministry. And I remember him sitting with me on the platform in church as I was getting up to preach on this topic of the New Reformation. And as I stood up to preach, he said behind me, preach the new Reformation, you know, and that kind of person standing with me. One of the men I took on a mission trip to Romania in 1992, a fellow by the name of Hud. Hud came in with me on that mission trip. He'd been involved in the discipleship group with me. I had this conviction that he was supposed to go on this mission trip for whatever reason. I had no idea why. I just had this abiding conviction that the Spirit said, invite Hud. He needs to be on this mission trip. Don't even invite him. Just tell him he should come. You know. And Hud fortunately said at that point, well, you know, if you think I should come, I will. You know, neither one of us understood what the Lord had in mind. Here we are 23 years later, and Hud is still very involved in Romania because he was called of God to take over an orphanage in Romania. And as a commercial real estate developer, he was also a negotiator. He wrested control of this orphanage from the Romanian government, brought it under a 501c3 in the United States, provided all the funding for that particular orphanage, turned it into a Christian home in Romania, made 8 family units, hired mothers for all those family units to take care of 35 HIV-positive kids. All became about because we were in partnership in ministry, that we were side by side in ministry. And I said, Hud, that's God's call in your life. Do it. You know, I'll back you up. I'll help you make that happen in our church, but go for it. And so we have the opportunity to trust people in ministry like that. And then last under leadership manner here, share the spotlight. I understand leading up to this particular conference that the people of God here were brought up on stage for our last number of weeks, Jim, to share their quad stories with the congregation. I don't know how many weeks you did that. Great model. You know, you're sharing the spotlight. You're putting the spotlight on all the heroes in the church. Who are the heroes in your church? Is it the pastors? Or is it the people of God carrying out the ministry at the ground level, you know, as the ground troops, you know? Focus in on, spotlight those people, bring them up front, share the glory with them. Now, I know of some pastors that can't do that because they can't share the glory. They have to be the center of attention. Ministry will only flourish if you can focus the spotlight away from yourself on others and show the congregation, you know, the people that are really stepping forward to do that. Bill Walsh was a very famous coach here in this country. He coached the San Francisco 49ers football team. And he put a finger on an issue here that I think is very important. He says there is another side that can wreck a team or an organization. That is being distracted by your own importance. It can come from your insecurity in working with others. It can be the need to draw attention to yourself in the public arena. It can be a feeling that others are a threat to your own territory. And it seems to me that one of the most important characteristics for anybody in a leadership role is personal security. If you're secure about yourself, you allow others to flourish around you. In fact, you not only allow them to flourish, you will celebrate their flourishing. You'll be able to say, wow, look what God is doing through that person's life. If there's insecurity, you will not allow yourself to do that. So part of equipping ministry is the whole manner of leadership, how you deport yourself in leadership to allow other people to flourish in that ministry. Moses shared the leadership, and this has to do with leadership style. Styles that inhibit in every member of ministry. What are some of the leadership styles that inhibit every member of ministry? Well, there's the do-it-all pastor. We've already talked about that. I don't think we probably run that one into the ground. How about the authoritarian models of ministry? There is the, I am in charge, I tell you what to do, kind of model of ministry. The centralized power, and I delegate to everybody. Well, that's still very much a control kind of mechanism. All vision comes from the pastor defines all the roles, people must fit into certain predetermined job descriptions. I'm in charge here. Nobody better doubt that. So once you're going to get an every member ministry, you have to start letting loose of control and allowing people to make some of their own mistakes, to go a direction. And then the last one is what we might call the laissez-faire style of leadership that is inhibiting to every member ministry, and that is essentially non-leadership. I followed a man in ministry when I went to my church in Northern California who I would consider a laissez-faire pastor. This pastor did not provide leadership, and it was as if, well, if I create a vacuum of leadership, people might fill in roles within the life of the church. That's possible. But oftentimes you end up directionless as well. So what's a model of leadership that actually enhances an every member ministry? Styles that encourage ministry partnership. Well, a first among equals. I sense that that's the role that Ralph plays here in this church. That he's got a team of people that are all engaged. People don't doubt that he's the senior pastor here at this church, but people are free to function, and he's working in partnership with others. He certainly has his perspective and vision and direction, and yet allows initiative to come from other angles as well. So others can take initiative. So it's a first among equal kind of thing. A mutual visioning. The way I like to see it, if I'm the head of something and kind of the appointed leader, the way I put it is, this is what I see. What do you see? This is the vision that God seems to have given me, but I want to check that out. What do you see? What vision has God given you? Let's mix this together and make that happen. And then there's perhaps a more democratic style of leadership as well. And this may function more in terms of a culture like our own, better than maybe cultures that are others also represented here. But more of an equality of staff leadership, of functioning together. So sort of freedom within certain amount of boundaries that is established. So Moses shared the leadership. There are certain ways to deport yourself that actually enhances the ministry of the people of God. And then Moses finally decentralized the structure. Now we're working on one aspect of this decentralization here, because I would say what I see in Moses or Jethro's advice to Moses is, break the nation down into thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Everybody is in a group of 10. Everybody has a judge over a group of 10. You don't have to go very far to get a decision to be made. So the whole idea of decentralizing the structure into a small group ministry, we're talking about a type of small group here in this particular conference in terms of the micro group or triads and quads that we're talking about as discipling units. But it's helpful to create teams, break things down into smaller units. To have a gifts and call strategy where you're helping people find their spiritual gifts and their call. This conference is not about all that. That's maybe another conference that we could do. But what we're focused in on this last one is reproducing discipleship groups. And as I was talking to Jim at the break, an insight occurred to me. You're asking probably the question that should be asked in yourself. You're saying, well, how do I get from the dependency model ministry to this equipping model that you're talking about? It seems like a radical shift. What's the change process that we can go through? And you can't just go back and say, we've been doing it all wrong. This is what we're going to do. But you can go back and do this. What we're giving you is a strategy that is subversive. You're going to go back and you're going to find 3 or 4 people to invest in, who are then going to, after a year or so, find 3 or 4 people to invest in. and you're going to create this kind of underground revolution in your ministry. You don't have to take it on head on. You don't have to go at odds with the board that you're working with. You can just find a group of people, invest in them, watch them grow up in the faith, watch them find that internal desire to invest in others, and then it grows slowly. And then you start working some of those people into leadership roles in your church, become allies with you in terms of the kind of ministry and congregation that you want to have. And it does take time. I always say you have to have a 3 to 5 year plan in mind if you're going to have this transformation take place. None of this is instant. You have to have patience to see the kind of transformation take place over a period of time. But I think we are giving you an idea of how you can quietly create a revolution within your own church ministry models. But the big issue here is you have to stay focused over a long period of time. And there will probably be plenty of things that get you off track and try to pull you back into the old expectations that will be there. But leadership is about stick-to-itiveness. I had people in my church in Northern California that used to say that I was obstinate, that I was just going to stick to my ideas. I just said, no, I'm consistent. Yes, I have a vision of where I want to see things go, true. And you may not like that vision, but until God gives me another one, that's the focus that we're going to be on. And so the idea of staying on track over a period of time and keeping the vision of a Christ-centered multiplying ministry of discipleship groups is something that will sustain you over a period of time. But that's where you need partners as well. You need other allies who are trying to do the same thing. And hopefully you have people that you can connect with that will keep you on track and keep you focused. So developing people to maturity in ministry. Mission of the church, make disciples of all nations. You're trying to grow people to maturity and Christ-like character. You're trying to help people become the steward of their gifts and call in ministry. You're trying to multiply disciples who make disciples. That's what an equipping ministry is all about. So working out this intentionality of the strategy that we have here. So let me skip here to a final challenge. There was a story that came out of Oliver Cromwell's reign in the mid-1600s, precious metals, and they came back with the results of their investigation. They said, well, the only silver we can find are the statues of the saints standing in the corners of the church. And Oliver Cromwell said, well, we need to melt down the saints and put them in circulation. That's what we need to do. Melt down the saints and put them in circulation. Okay, that's the conclusion of that particular set in terms of lectures. Any questions about this particular portion that we have gone over that you would want to do, or any other questions? This is Q&A time. You got questions? And I have another question up here on my table as well. Why a group of 4, not 7, 10, or 12? This would be an easier question to answer probably tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going into the whole focus on what are the core elements of a disciple-making ministry: relationship, multiplication, and transformation. And when I get to the elements of transformation, we'll look at 4 of them. And they are relational transparency, truth in community, life-change accountability, and missional outreach. I've added a 4th, by the way, okay, since the last time I was here. So when you look at each one of those, the larger the group becomes, the more difficult it is to accomplish those things. the optimum environments to accomplish the core elements that lead to transformation is a smaller group of 4. You add more people, it's harder to get relational transparency, and we'll come back to this. It's harder to have people interact around the scriptures in terms of applying the truth to their life and telling their own story. It's harder to have life-change accountability in terms of people knowing what it is that they're being held accountable for. And it's more difficult to support people in terms of their gifts and call for mission. So the ideal size to create the environment is a smaller group. I'll come at this from another angle. There was a book that was written called Search for, oh gosh, I lost the title. Anyhow, it was written to describe the number of spaces that we need in our churches. Now I'm trying to find the title in my head here. But Joseph Myers wrote this book, and he said, in our churches, we need 4 kinds of spaces. He talked about public space, social space, personal space, and intimate space. So public space, we would equate, at least in the American context here, to kind of public worship. Anybody can walk into a worship experience or public identification with our church. Doesn't require anything to be a part of the public space. Somebody could say, well, I go to Camarillo Community Church. I might show up 3 times a year, but that's my church. So that's kind of public connection. Then there's social space. Social space is finding people like yourself of common interest, where we have chemistry with one another. My wife and I are part of a small group on Sunday night. We have 7 couples in that group. Okay, it's not a discipleship group, but it's people that we have great chemistry with. They're people who are engaged in ministry, that are our peers by age. There are people we have great respect for because of the way they're giving themselves in terms of their ministry and life. And when we get together, it's just like, wow, this is fun, to be together. It's a little bit more social space that moves into personal space. Personal space is where you are starting to get personal with people, but you're not revealing yourself deeply. And that happens in groups of 8 to 12. Intimate space is this smaller group of 4, 3. You will not create intimate space in a group of 10. And if it's intimate space is necessary for the transformative process because you're bringing truth into the real place where you live, the reason for not having those larger groups for a discipleship group is you're not going to get to that place of intimacy and openness, because if you're not applying the truth of God's word at the real places in your life, then transformation is not taking place. So that's the reason for that size. Search to belong. Thank you. Yes. Joseph Myers. Appreciate that. Whoever asked that question, did I answer that question? Did I answer it too much? Okay. I had I know a question that was given to me, if I can find it under my papers here. Okay. I'll find it here. What other questions or comments do we have? Yes. Benny. What's the difference between mentoring and discipling? Okay. It has to do with who initiates the relationship is the difference. The mentoring is a broad term that covers lots of different kinds of relationship. But usually it's the mentee in search of a mentor. So it's the mentee that initiates the relationship and saying, I'm looking for a mentor. So I actually have a number of mentoring relationships, primarily with younger leaders, Pradeep being one of them. I've had a mentoring relationship with a man on Young Life staff back in the Chicago area that developed while I was there. Another one who is a Navy chaplain in Texas. All of them initiated that relationship with me. A discipling relationship, it's the discipler who's initiating the relationship. You are praying about who it is that God has called you to invest in. And you're taking the initiative to go invest in that person. And so you have more of a plan. In mentoring relationships, it tends to be the mentee who sets the agenda. So I'm there to be a coach, and I know this church is involved very much in coaching. My job is to ask powerful questions, to raise issues, to draw the potential out of the individual, but they tell me what it is that they want to talk about. In the discipling relationship, it's a more structured relationship where you're taking somebody somewhere, and you are then developing them so that they can disciple others as well. Does that make sense? Okay. Is this a new question? Oh, okay. Another one. I should find the other one. Oh, this is a long one. This might take me an hour to read. We want the people of God to be involved in running the ministry. If we encourage democratic rule in the church, will this not create a possible problem of allowing the elders, council, or people to dictate on the pastor as to where the church is to be headed and what it should do? What should the pastor do if there is a conflict of the pastor's vision and the elders? I think it's a legitimate fear, a legitimate concern when you are letting go of control. What if they run with it and get out of control? So the issue of developing trust relationships between leadership and people can be a challenge. I remember teaching the very same things I was teaching you here earlier to Korean pastors. And I was in the middle of my lecture in Korea. I had a Korean translator. And so I was talking about sharing ministry with the people of God. And all of a sudden I heard this murmur going on in the class. 30 pastors, Koreans. I said, "What's going on here? Something just happened." And so they said to me, "Well, if we share power with the elders, they will take that power and use it against us." And I said, "Well, you got a deeper problem than I can solve." What is that pointing to? What's the issue there? If you can't trust, if people use power as a weapon, there's some deeper issue there to me in terms of and I'm not sure if I understand quite the cultural dynamics of what's going on at that point. But yeah, I think I think Korea in particular became known as church growth by church split. So a lot of those kinds of things taking place. So maybe some of you can give me some feedback on that. I'm not sure exactly how to address this particular issue because I don't know the context that it's coming from. But this is where I think you need, where pastors can develop a team of people that you work with, that you have a trusted relationship with. They don't have to be all yes people. They don't have to be just saluting the vision of the pastor. But they can be people that have regard and respect for each other. If you don't have regard and respect for each other in terms of who you are and what their position is, then you are in trouble. So there has to be legitimate authority. I'm not saying that you give up an authority structure and let things run wild, but there also has to be a shared and trust in leadership that says, I believe in you. I believe that God has called all of us to ministry. So there is a balance there, certainly, that I don't know how to give a precise answer to in terms of, how do you share ministry and power and, have respect for the pastor's vision, but the pastor have respect for the people's vision as well. So it has to be kind of a mutual thing. Well, this brings up the issue of, I call it philosophy of ministry. So you have a certain kind of ministry that you're committed to. So this church is committed to a very intentional discipling ministry. Ralph, would you hire somebody on this church staff that said, I think the way you're doing it is all wrong? No. No, you would only bring somebody on that is consistent with that philosophy of ministry. So you're committed yourself in a certain way. The issue that was being pointed up in this question of the kind of concern about sharing power and maybe having it being misused seems to me is pointing us back right to the very issue we're trying to address here, which is people have not been discipled. People have not grown in their character and their integrity. So you're just pointing out a discipleship problem, and that's a symptom of lack of discipleship, is that people do not know how to use power, or they have not learned to be servants to one another and respect one another. In this ministry, if we're just trying to jockey for position and get our way, that's really a discipleship issue, a character issue that needs to be addressed. Yes.
This kind of situation is very popular, very common in different places and different countries. The power is with the deacons. And when the pastor is working to grow, for example, they are expecting that news from the pastor, and they are going against. And for my personal experience, many years ago, with this kind of people who was leading many years, they are feeling the owners of the church, the building, and the organization. Mm-hmm. And it's so hard to destroy that power.
Yeah.
And we did some specific ways for that, and especially to talk, a lot of talking with each one of them. The pastor can show his spiritual life is only obedient Jesus, and showing on the Bible what have to do the church.
Yeah.
And praying about that with them.
Right.
And after that, if we can have good result with 3 or 4, the next time when we are discussing new possibilities with all the group, we have 2 or 3 talking same as the pastor.
Right. Yeah, so there's probably a way to develop a relationship with your deacons, get to know them, come alongside them, befriend them, find out what their issues are in their life, minister to them, maybe even form some of them into a discipleship group so that they can be a part of the vanguard of something new taking place within the life of the church. Okay. So let's kind of drill from that point down into the disciple-making model that we're talking about here. So you have this decentralized structure, Ralph and Jim and Bev and et cetera, where you are seeing the increasing growth of groups that are 3, 4, 5 generations out, right? So how do you handle the tough issues, as Jim was describing? So Moses said, you handle all that kind of day-to-day stuff that can be handled, but you're still there as the backstop, to handle the tough stuff. Do you have a way of doing that here? Maybe there's theological questions that come up that can't be handled, or other issues that get exposed in a group like that need to be dealt with.
They call sinkholes and potholes. Potholes are the little ones. Sinkholes will destroy you. And we'll be dealing with a lot of those kinds of questions when we get there, so we won't try to answer all that today. But obviously every church has a different structure. Every pastor has a different personality. Every board, every church has a different personality. I think sometimes the strategy is you outlive them. You just say, okay, I'm just going to hang in here and keep following Christ and keep working, and and they'll just finally pass away. I'll outlive them all or something.
Ralph, you're doing a pretty good job at that.
I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best.
How many years here? 32 years?
32 years. 32 years. So you just keep following the Lord and doing what you feel like He's telling you to do. But obviously, when we transitioned 5 years ago from normal church stuff to becoming a discipleship-oriented church, this was a transition. But we didn't do it overnight. You know, you turn corners fast and you'll throw people overboard. You turn slower and you can keep everybody on board. And we went 2 years without letting anybody know we were doing discipleship. I mean, we didn't. It was an experiment. We were just trying it. We didn't announce it. We didn't say it. So in 2 years, 2.5 years, it had multiplied to a point where there were significant number of people that were already on board, already involved, and we were moving that direction. There are still some in our congregation who haven't totally bought in, and that's okay. We wait for them. You know, we're not going to kick them out. We'll wait for them for God to build the hunger in their heart.
Would you say that this church has shifted in terms of its identity as a disciple-making congregation? That would be what you would be known for?
Without question. Without question.
Yeah.
I first came here 32 years ago. I came with Campus Crusade background, very evangelistic. We did mostly converts, and we did lots of things, and that wasn't bad. It just wasn't enough. And we grew the church by doing lots of outreach kinds of things and big events and whatever, you know, the common stuff that's used. But after 25 years, we realized that wasn't enough. That wasn't adequate. We had a large church. We had a nice building. We had lots of good stuff, but it wasn't enough. Mm-hmm. And we weren't satisfied. And that's when we began to look deeper and say, okay, there's got to be more. And indeed, there was. We found a way to that. And now we've ventured in a new direction. And we have a new identity. There's no question. Yeah. We have a new identity. It's not that we're not evangelistic. We certainly are. But discipleship has become the predominant name tag for us. You know, we're a discipling church.
Right. And I think you're illustrating the point I was trying to make earlier. I'm not sure if you were in the room at the time, but I was saying that in terms of change process,
yes,
you were underground for 2 years.
Right.
It was not a part of the public message of the church. You weren't announcing discipleship groups on Sunday morning or anything. You allowed that to kind of ferment underneath the surface.
And due to your encouragement there, really, because it comes out of our reading of your book and your material, discipleship is not overnight. It takes time, and you don't change the direction of a church overnight. It takes time. Jesus, 3.5 years with 12 guys, basically. Yeah. That's long-term stuff, and we just had to let it grow and mature at its own rate, and God do the work around us, and He changed our church.
Yeah. It's kind of like the kingdom of God and the mustard seed, right?
Yeah, mustard seed.
It grows into...
Just let it grow.
Quietly into before you know it. Look what's happened. Yeah. I want to make sure you've done your takeaways for the day. This is an important element here that you are reviewing and that you are making sure. Are you keeping track of that as you're going? Do you feel like you're current? Do we need some time to stop and pause to review and make sure your takeaways are continuing to compile? Need some time? Or should we just go on with the questions here? Help me here. So it looks like you're okay. So I've got a question here that was given me earlier regarding the Trinity Circle of Love. How does one illustrate the above to a person who never experienced a loving earthly family? How do you explain this family of God that is this healthy place of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit to people who have not had healthy families? In a word, I think the gospel is about getting reparented. Having God as our Father is a reparenting process. I would say personally that I certainly did not get all that I wanted from an earthly father. My father, even though he came from a mission family, was never in the position of being able to pass on his faith to me. That was never part of his mission and his consciousness. When he died in 1992, I went away on a private retreat about a month or so after my father's death. And I found myself strongly drawn to Paul's second letter to Timothy. And I realized why I was so drawn to that, because, Paul was passing on his faith to Timothy in that letter. It was his last letter that he wrote. He was giving himself to Timothy and urging Timothy in every way he could think of to carry on the faith. And I read that and I said, I so wanted that to be true of me. I wanted my father to be in a position to be able to pass his faith on to me. But obviously the finality of that was true once he died, and that sense of loss that I experienced even as I was reading 2 Timothy again. But that doesn't mean that I cannot experience God as Father, as the true Father, as the Father that I never had. That's the experience that we get to have. So because you've not had an earthly family that is healthy, you can still experience that from God, and you can experience it in the context of the Christian community. I think that's one of the things that can happen in our triads and quads. That's almost a family experience that you're having, of people that care for you and love you or engage with you, and maybe it may be the first time that some people ever experience people that take deep interest and care in their lives, and you can be that. One of the men I had in one of my groups came from a family of 6 children. He was the eldest of 6. His father was a raging alcoholic, and I use the word raging for good reason, because he was constantly violent. And he would say, how can I trust God as Father with the father that I had? And that was a constant issue within our discipleship group. I have a real difficulty trusting people and trusting others, because look what happened to my family. But he had his breakthrough of really getting to that place where he could submit to God as his Father and begin to experience. And I think in part because of what he was experienced among the 4 of us men that we're sharing his life together. So I think that's not only perfectly possible, I think that's almost what the gospel is all about. It's about that grace that comes from our God into our lives that we can experience, that we're never going to get perfectly from other human beings. So we are at 5 o'clock, and we will have more opportunity for this to continue tomorrow. So tomorrow we head into the heart of the matter. We've been laying foundations now at this point, and tomorrow we go into the real core characteristics of what makes for a disciple-making atmosphere and relationships. And we'll spend that day of tomorrow on that. And then on Thursday, we start moving into these very practical steps that we take to implement this kind of disciple-making ministry. So more good stuff ahead.